Grace built Samuel's empire with 20 years of sacrifice and devotion. "If you can't accept Joy as my second wife, you're free to leave. But the children stay here, and you leave with nothing." Samuel's cold words shattered Grace's world. After decades of loyalty, she was being discarded for Joy, a cunning young woman who had systematically destroyed everything Grace held dear. Stripped of her home, her children, and her dignity, Grace was cast out like a beggar while Joy moved into her bedroom. But Samuel and Joy made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the woman they'd crushed. In the bustling heart of Lagos, in a cramped two-room flat in Surulere that barely had running water, Grace Adebayo knelt on a thin mat, counting coins by candlelight. The electricity had been cut off again, and Samuel wouldn't be home for another 3 hours. Grace was already the backbone of a business that existed only in her husband's dreams. 50 naira, 75 naira, Grace whispered, her fingers moving across the small pile of money she had earned, selling akara and bread to office workers that morning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy ingredients for tomorrow's batch and still have something left for Samuel's lunch money. Grace had been supporting them both while Samuel studied for his accounting certification, selling food before dawn and working as a typist during the day. When Samuel finally arrived home that night, exhausted from his evening classes, Grace had his dinner waiting, rice and stew made from the cheapest cuts of meat, but seasoned with the love and hope that had sustained them through their early years of marriage. "How did the exam preparation go today?" Grace asked, serving Samuel's food while she ate bread and tea. "Difficult," Samuel admitted, rubbing his tired eyes. "But Mr. Johnson thinks I'm ready for the certification exam next month." "Grace, if I pass this exam, everything will change for us." Grace smiled, though privately she wondered how they would afford the fees to register Samuel's practice. Her grandmother's gold jewelry, the only valuable thing she owned, sat in a small box under their bed. Grace had been thinking about it for weeks. "Samuel," Grace said quietly, "what if we sold my grandmother's jewelry to pay for your business registration?" Samuel looked up from his food, surprised. "Grace, those bangles are all you have from your family. Your grandmother wore them her entire life. And now they can help us build our future," Grace replied firmly. "Dreams require sacrifice, my husband, and I'm willing to sacrifice for ours." That weekend, Grace sold her grandmother's gold bangles in Lagos Island's jewelry market. The money was enough to register Samuel's accounting practice, rent a small office space for 6 months, and buy basic office supplies. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel asked as Grace handed him the money. Grace looked at her empty wrists, feeling the absence of the bangles that had connected her to 3 generations of women in her family. But she also felt something else, the excitement of investing in a future she was helping to create. "I've never been more sure of anything," Grace said. "We're going to build something beautiful together." Neither of them could have imagined that those words would prove both prophetic and ironic in ways that would reshape both their lives. Samuel's accounting practice grew slowly but steadily over the following years, and Grace was the invisible force behind every success. While Samuel handled the technical work, Grace managed everything else: client relations, marketing, bookkeeping, and the elaborate networking that kept new business flowing. Grace would wake before dawn to prepare breakfast and lunch for Samuel, then spend her day calling potential clients, organizing their small office, and maintaining the relationships that sustained their growing business. In the evenings, she would cook dinner for Samuel's clients, transforming their tiny apartment into a professional dining space where deals were negotiated over perfectly prepared Nigerian dishes. "Mrs. Adebayo," Chief Johnson told Grace after one particularly successful client dinner, "your husband is lucky to have a partner who understands business so well." Grace smiled modestly, but privately she knew the truth. She didn't just understand business, she was the business. Samuel was skilled at accounting, but Grace was the one who found the clients, maintained the relationships, and created the professional environment that made Samuel's expertise valuable. When their first child, Maya, was born, they had moved to a modest house in Ikeja, and Samuel's practice employed 3 junior accountants. Grace managed the office while caring for baby Maya, often working with the baby sleeping in a carrier on her back. "Grace, you're incredible," Samuel would tell her when he found her balancing client calls with feeding schedules. "I don't know how you do it all." "Because I love what we're building," Grace would reply. "This is our dream, Samuel, our future. When David was born, followed by Michael, Grace's responsibilities multiplied, but so did her capabilities. She developed systems for managing the household, the children, and the business with the precision of a military operation. Grace also began to have ideas for expanding the business. She suggested they offer tax consulting when new government regulations created opportunities. She identified potential partnerships with law firms and banks. She proposed seminars for small business owners who needed financial guidance. "You have a gift for seeing opportunities," Samuel told her one evening as they reviewed her latest business proposal. "I can handle the work we have, but you can see the work we could have." Years passed, and Samuel Adebayo and Associates became one of Lagos's most respected accounting firms. Samuel had been invited to join professional boards, and they had moved to a larger house in Victoria Island. Grace had transformed herself from a young wife supporting her husband's dreams into an elegant business partner who could discuss strategy with bank executives and host dinner parties for government ministers. But something had begun to shift in their relationship. As Samuel's public profile grew, he started referring to "my business" instead of "our business." He made decisions without consulting Grace, then informed her afterward. He introduced her as "my wife Grace" instead of "my business partner." "You focus on the home and children," Samuel would say when Grace questioned being excluded from important meetings. "That's what you do best." Grace told herself it was natural evolution. As the business grew, roles became more specialized. She was still essential, just in different ways. She had no idea that Samuel was already beginning to see her contributions as replaceable rather than irreplaceable. Joy Okoro entered their lives like a carefully planned infiltration disguised as coincidence. It was during Grace's annual Christmas party for Samuel's business associates. Grace had spent weeks planning the event, coordinating catering, decorations, and entertainment that would impress their guests while staying within budget. Grace was in the kitchen, ensuring the serving schedule ran smoothly, when Samuel appeared with a stunning young woman who couldn't have been much older than their daughter Maya. "Grace, my dear," Samuel said with the warm charm he used for important clients, "meet Joy Okoro. She's just started working with Chief Emeka's firm. Joy, this is my wife Grace." Grace's first impression was that Joy was beautiful in the effortless way of very young women. Flawless skin, perfect figure, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing every man in the room had noticed her arrival. "Mrs. Adebayo," Joy said, her voice sweet and respectful, "your home is absolutely gorgeous. Everyone talks about your legendary hospitality." Grace smiled warmly, immediately liking the young woman's respectful demeanor. "Thank you, my dear. Welcome to our home. Are you enjoying the party?" "Oh yes, ma'am. Mr. Adebayo has been so kind, introducing me to everyone. He told me you're the real genius behind his success." The comment pleased Grace, though she noticed how Joy's eyes seemed to track Samuel's movements even as she spoke to Grace. Over the following months, Joy became a regular presence in their social circle. She was always respectful to Grace, often seeking advice about Lagos business culture, cooking tips, and career development. She seemed like a younger sister eager to learn from Grace's experience. "That Joy is such a sweet girl," Grace told Samuel after a church service where Joy had helped organize the Women's Auxiliary fundraiser. "So polite and hard-working. She reminds me of myself at that age." What Grace didn't see was how Joy positioned herself in Samuel's line of sight during conversations. How she laughed just a little too enthusiastically at his jokes. How she found reasons to touch his arm during discussions about business matters. Joy had studied Grace carefully, learning her routines, her values, her blind spots. She knew exactly how to appear respectful and unthreatening, while systematically positioning herself as Grace's younger, more energetic replacement. The seduction happened gradually. Joy would call Samuel's office with questions about business procedures. Her inquiries intelligent enough to flatter his expertise, but simple enough to require personal attention. Coffee meetings to discuss career strategies became lunch appointments to review business proposals, which evolved into weekend consultations about important presentations. "Joy has real potential," Samuel told Grace after one such meeting. "She just needs mentorship to navigate Lagos business culture." Grace encouraged Samuel's involvement, seeing it as evidence of his generous spirit and commitment to helping young professionals succeed. But Joy's questions were becoming more personal, more admiring. "You're so wise, Mr. Adebayo," she would say, her eyes wide with apparent admiration. "Mrs. Adebayo is so fortunate to have a husband with such vision and intelligence." Samuel, now in his middle years and feeling the weight of routine, found Joy's youthful worship intoxicating. Here was a beautiful young woman who saw him not as a husband burdened with responsibilities, but as a successful, attractive man worthy of devotion. The affair began during a business conference in Abuja. Joy had convinced her employer to send her to the same event, and Samuel had offered to coordinate their travel arrangements for efficiency. When they returned from Abuja, Grace noticed changes in Samuel immediately. He seemed more energetic, more concerned with his appearance, more interested in social events that had never excited him before. He bought new clothes, joined an expensive gym, and began making plans for trips that had previously held no appeal. Grace was pleased to see Samuel so enthusiastic about business development, not realizing that his new energy came from the excitement of conducting a secret affair with a woman young enough to be his daughter. Joy wasn't content with being Samuel's secret mistress. She had bigger plans that required eliminating Grace's position entirely. Over the following months, Joy began making subtle comments designed to poison Samuel's perception of his marriage. "Mrs. Adebayo is so fortunate to focus on domestic life while you handle all the business pressure," Joy would observe during their private meetings. "Some women don't appreciate how much their husbands sacrifice for the family's success. You work so hard for everyone else," she would say sympathetically. "I hope they recognize what you give up for them." Samuel, intoxicated by Joy's attention and admiration, began to see Grace through increasingly critical eyes. Instead of the partner who had built his empire, he saw someone who had become comfortable with the fruits of his labor. Instead of the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams for his success, he saw someone who had benefited from his achievements without truly understanding their cost. Meanwhile, Grace was beginning to notice subtle changes in their household dynamic. Joy had started visiting more frequently, always with reasonable excuses, helping with charity events, seeking business advice, bringing gifts for the children. But Grace observed how Joy's skirts became slightly shorter with each visit, how her perfume became more noticeable, how her conversations with Samuel lasted longer and became more intimate. "Joy spends a lot of time here lately," Grace mentioned to Samuel one evening. "She's eager to learn," Samuel replied dismissively. "I remember what it was like being young and ambitious in Lagos. Mentorship makes a difference." Grace wanted to trust her husband, but her instincts were sending warning signals she couldn't ignore. Joy's behavior toward Grace remained perfectly respectful, but there was something calculating in the younger woman's eyes, something predatory in how she observed the family's routines and dynamics. The revelation came on a humid Tuesday evening, when Samuel returned from work looking unusually formal, like a man prepared to deliver a business presentation rather than spend a quiet evening with his family. Grace was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal, when Samuel entered with the bearing of someone about to announce a major decision. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar coldness. Grace looked up from the soup she was stirring, immediately sensing that something was fundamentally wrong. "I've made a decision about our family's future," Samuel continued, with the detached tone of a CEO announcing corporate restructuring. "I'm taking a second wife." The wooden spoon clattered to the kitchen floor as Grace's hands went numb with shock. "What did you say?" she whispered, certain she had misheard. "Joy and I are getting married next month. You'll remain my senior wife, of course. Your position in this family doesn't change." Grace gripped the counter edge to keep herself upright as the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Joy? The girl I've been mentoring? The one who's been coming to our home for advice?" Samuel's jaw tightened with irritation. "Don't make this more difficult than necessary, Grace. This is a practical decision. Joy is young, she can give me more children, and she understands modern business demands better than you do." The words hit Grace like physical blows. "More children? Modern business demands? Samuel, what are you talking about? We built this business together. We have 3 beautiful children together. What more could you possibly need? I need a wife who appreciates my achievements instead of taking them for granted," Samuel said coldly. "Someone who supports my ambitions instead of questioning them. Joy understands what successful men require." Grace stared at the stranger wearing her husband's face, struggling to process how the man she had loved and supported for over 20 years could speak to her with such casual cruelty. Taking your achievements for granted? Grace's voice rose for the first time. Samuel, I gave up my own dreams to support yours. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to fund your first office. I worked day and night to build your client relationships. I sacrificed everything for your success. And you benefited from that success, Samuel replied dismissively. This house, the children's education, your comfortable lifestyle, all of that came from my work. Your work? Grace's voice cracked with disbelief. Samuel, I was there for every contract negotiation, every client dinner, every business decision. I built those relationships while you focused on technical matters. I managed operations while you traveled. I raised our children while building your empire. Samuel's face darkened with anger. That's enough emotional dramatics, Grace. Joy moves in next week. I expect you to treat her with respect and help her adjust to our family. The ultimate threat came with chilling casualness. If you can't accept this arrangement, you're free to leave. But the children stay here with their father, and you leave with nothing except what you brought to this marriage years ago. Grace felt her world collapse as she realized Samuel had planned this conversation like a hostile business takeover, anticipating her objections and preparing counter-arguments designed to force her submission. I need time to think, Grace managed to say. You have until Friday, Samuel replied with the tone of a CEO setting a deadline. Joy moves in this weekend, with or without your blessing. The next morning brought the most painful conversation of Grace's life. Maya, David, and Michael sat around the breakfast table, sensing the tension that had settled over their home like a poisonous fog. Children, Grace began, struggling to keep her voice steady, your father has something important to tell you. Samuel adopted the same formal tone he had used with Grace. We're adding a new member to our family. I'm marrying Miss Joy, and she'll be living here with us. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya, now a teenager and mature enough to understand the implications, found her voice first. Papa, what about Mama? Are you divorcing her? No, Samuel replied quickly. Your mother remains my wife. Joy will be my second wife. In our culture, this isn't unusual for successful men. David, passionate about justice even at his young age, shot to his feet so quickly his chair nearly toppled. Papa, how can you do this to Mama? She's been nothing but loyal to you. This isn't right. Sit down, David, Samuel commanded sharply. This is an adult decision that doesn't require children's approval. Michael, the youngest, asked the question that cut deepest. Papa, don't you love Mama anymore? Samuel's composure cracked slightly as he looked at his youngest son's confused, hurt face. Of course I love your mother, but marriage involves more than emotions. There are practical considerations, legacy issues, business requirements. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she turned to Grace. Mama, what do you say about this? Grace looked at her 3 children, confused, angry, desperately seeking reassurance from the parent who had always been their emotional anchor, and felt her heart shatter. Your father has made his decision, Grace said carefully, and we all have to live with the consequences. But it's not fair, David shouted, his voice breaking with fury. Mama, you don't have to accept this. You can leave him. You can take us with you. Samuel's voice turned dangerous. You will not disrespect me in my own house, David. And your mother cannot take you anywhere. This is your home, I am your father, and these decisions are mine to make. Maya stood and wrapped her arms around Grace. I don't want another woman in this house, Mama. This is your home. It's not about what any of you want, Samuel said with finality. Joy is coming, and that's decided. You will treat her with respect, or there will be consequences. Michael began crying, the weight of his family's destruction finally hitting him. Why can't things stay the way they were? We were happy before. Grace held her youngest son close, her own tears flowing freely. Sometimes things change, Michael, even when we don't want them to. But what never changes is how much I love you, how proud I am of you, and how much I believe in your futures. That evening, Maya came to Grace's bedroom, where her mother sat by the window, staring out at the garden where she had once planned to host her children's wedding celebrations. Mama, Maya said quietly, why are you letting him do this to you? Grace looked at her fierce, protective daughter and felt both heartbreak and pride. Sometimes, my daughter, the strongest thing a woman can do is wait for the right moment to act. Your father thinks he holds all the power in this situation. But power shifts, circumstances change, and patience can be a weapon if you know how to use it. Maya didn't fully understand her mother's words, but she sensed that Grace was not as defeated as she appeared. "What are you going to do, Mama?" Grace smiled sadly, touching her daughter's face with infinite tenderness. "I'm going to survive, Maya, and I'm going to show you children what real strength looks like." Joy moved into the Victoria Island mansion on a Saturday morning, arriving with enough luggage to suggest months of preparation. Grace watched from an upstairs window as Samuel personally carried Joy's suitcases into the converted guest room that would serve as her private suite. Joy wore a beautiful traditional dress and moved through the house with the satisfaction of a general surveying conquered territory. The children had made themselves scarce, Maya at her aunt's house, David with friends, Michael locked in his room. "Grace," Samuel called from downstairs, "come welcome Joy properly to our home." Grace descended the stairs with as much dignity as she could summon, finding Joy in the living room examining family photographs with unconcealed triumph. "Senior wife," Joy said, performing a perfect traditional greeting. "Thank you for welcoming me into our home." The phrase "our home" hit Grace like a slap, but she maintained her composure. "Welcome, Joy," Grace replied formally. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." "Oh, I'm sure I will be," Joy replied, her smile bright with barely concealed victory. "Samuel has told me how smoothly you run this household. I'm eager to learn from your experience." What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as domestic cooperation. Joy was unfailingly polite to Grace in Samuel's presence, always addressing her as senior wife and seeking guidance on household management. But when Samuel was absent, Joy's mask slipped completely. "I hope you understand that things will be different now," Joy told Grace one morning as they prepared breakfast together. "Samuel needs a wife who appreciates his success, not someone who takes it for granted." Grace continued chopping vegetables, not trusting herself to respond. "I'm not trying to replace you," Joy continued sweetly, "but Samuel and I have a special connection. He tells me things he doesn't share with anyone else." Joy began making subtle changes to establish her dominance. She rearranged living room furniture, claiming it would improve energy flow. She suggested new curtains because the existing ones were too dated for a man of Samuel's stature. She hired a new gardener because the grounds needed a more sophisticated appearance. Each change was presented as improvement, but Grace understood their real purpose, erasing her influence and establishing Joy's control over the domestic environment. The most painful changes involved the children. Joy made elaborate efforts to win them over with expensive gifts, special outings, and positioning herself as the modern mother figure who understood their contemporary interests better than Grace. Maya remained coldly polite but clearly hostile. David openly ignored Joy's attempts at conversation. But Michael, still young and confused by the family dynamics, gradually began responding to Joy's attention. "Michael is such a sweet boy," Joy told Samuel at dinner one evening. "He just needs someone who understands young people better. Grace means well, but her approach can be rather traditional." Grace felt her heart break a little more each time she watched Joy manipulate her youngest son's affections with calculated precision. The worst part was watching Samuel transform in Joy's presence. The husband who had once valued Grace's opinions now dismissed them in favor of Joy's suggestions. The man who had once consulted Grace about every important decision now made plans that Joy had obviously influenced. "Joy thinks we should join that new country club on the island," Samuel announced one evening. "She says the most important business networking happens there now." "That membership is extremely expensive," Grace observed, "and we already belong to 2 other clubs." "Grace, sometimes you have to invest money to make money," Samuel replied dismissively. "Joy understands that successful people need to be seen in the right places." Grace realized that Joy wasn't just taking her place in Samuel's bed. She was assuming her role in his business decisions, social planning, and future vision. Within months of Joy's arrival, Grace felt like a guest in her own home, watching someone else live her life. The final blow came when Grace discovered Joy had been systematically stealing from the family accounts. Grace was reviewing household expenses when she found evidence that made her blood freeze. Joy had been forging signatures to withdraw money for personal expenses, that had nothing to do with household management. Designer handbags, expensive spa treatments, money transfers to family members. The amounts were staggering, enough to buy a car or fund university education abroad. Grace confronted Samuel with the evidence, expecting him to share her shock and anger. Instead, Samuel barely glanced at the documents. Joy mentioned she needed money for family emergencies, he said dismissively. I told her to handle it however necessary. Grace stared at her husband in disbelief. Samuel, she stole over 2 million naira from our accounts. Without permission. Without discussion. This is theft. She didn't steal anything, Samuel replied coldly. She's my wife. She has access to family resources just like you do. Just like I do. Grace's voice rose. Samuel, I've managed these accounts for 20 years. I've never taken money without discussing it with you. I've never forged your signature. I've never treated family money like my personal allowance. Samuel's face hardened with annoyance. That's because you've never learned to think big. Joy has vision. She sees opportunities that require investment. What opportunities? Grace demanded. She bought designer clothes and sent money to her relatives. What vision does that demonstrate? You're jealous, Samuel said dismissively. You can't stand that Joy brings energy and ambition to this family while you've become comfortable and complacent. The accusation hit Grace like a physical blow. After decades of marriage and sacrifice, Samuel was calling her complacent. Complacent? Grace's voice became deadly quiet. Samuel, I built your business while you learned accounting. I created the client relationships that made you successful. I managed your household while raising your children. I sacrificed my dreams so you could achieve yours. And you call that complacent? That was then, Samuel replied with cruel finality. This is now. Joy understands what success requires in modern Lagos. She has connections, style, ambition. She makes me look successful in ways you never could. Grace felt something fundamental break inside her. Not her heart, which had been breaking slowly for months, but her faith in the man she had married and the life they had built together. I want you out of this house, Samuel continued with the coldness of a CEO terminating an employee. Joy is pregnant, and I won't have you creating stress during her pregnancy with your jealousy and negativity. The final blow. Joy was carrying Samuel's child while Grace was being discarded like outdated equipment. Where am I supposed to go? Grace asked quietly. That's not my concern, Samuel replied without emotion. You're an intelligent woman. You'll figure it out. But I want you gone by Friday. Grace looked at the stranger who wore her husband's face and spoke with his voice. And the children? Stay here, in their home with their father. You can visit them, but this disruption to their lives is your choice. Grace understood the trap perfectly. Accept complete humiliation or lose access to her children. Submit to Joy's dominance or be painted as the bitter wife who abandoned her family. But Grace had learned something during her months of watching Joy operate. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal wasn't immediate retaliation. It was strategic patience. I'll pack my things, Grace said with a calmness that unnerved Samuel. He had expected tears, arguments, desperate pleas for forgiveness. Grace's quiet dignity in defeat disturbed him more than any emotional outburst could have. Grace's last morning in the Victoria Island mansion was deliberately quiet. She woke before dawn, made breakfast for her children one final time, and sat with each of them individually before they left for school. Mama, I don't understand why you have to leave, Michael said, his voice breaking with confusion. Can't you just ignore Joy and stay for us? Grace held her youngest son close, memorizing the feeling of his arms around her. Sometimes, Michael, staying in a situation that destroys your dignity isn't just bad for you. It's bad for the people you love. I need to show you children that no one should accept being treated badly, even by people they love. Maya had a different concern. Mama, how will you survive? You've never lived alone. You've never had your own income. Grace smiled at her daughter's protective worry. My darling, you forget that I built a business empire once before. I was working and supporting myself before I met your father. I can do it again. Grace had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in Ikeja, far from Victoria Island's luxury but clean and affordable. Her sister Funmi had co-signed the lease, and Grace had enough savings to cover several months of rent. As the taxi pulled away from the mansion where she had spent years of her life, Grace didn't look back. She had learned from watching Joy that looking back was a luxury she couldn't afford. Standing in her empty apartment that evening, surrounded by suitcases containing decades of marriage, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. For the first time in decades, Grace was responsible only for herself. No husband's needs to anticipate, no elaborate social calendar to manage, no household staff to supervise. Just Grace, her thoughts, and unlimited possibilities. The first week was difficult. Grace had forgotten how loud silence could be, how long days felt when they weren't packed with other people's demands. But by the second week, Grace began rediscovering who she was beneath years of being Samuel's wife. She had always been an exceptional cook, but now she experimented with recipes she had never had time to perfect. She had always been skilled with numbers, but now she studied new business concepts that interested her. She had always been talented at managing people, but now she could consider how to use that skill for her own benefit. Grace also began taking walks through Lagos, really observing the city for the first time in years. As Samuel's wife, she had moved through Lagos in air-conditioned cars, traveling between exclusive locations. Now she rode public transport, shopped in local markets, and watched how most Lagosians actually lived and worked. What she saw amazed her. Everywhere, women were building businesses from nothing. Market vendors who had started with tiny stalls now managed supplier networks. Food sellers who had begun with single pots now ran catering operations. Hairstylists who had worked from their homes now owned salons. These women possessed something Grace had forgotten she had: the hunger and determination of people with nothing to lose and everything to gain. 3 weeks after leaving Samuel's house, Grace made her first independent business decision in over 20 years. She was going to start a catering company. Grace's catering business began with a single order: Maya's birthday party. "Mama," Maya had called, excitement clear in her voice, "Joy is planning some elaborate party for my birthday, but I don't want her involved. Can you cater it instead? I'll pay you from my birthday money." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Her daughter wasn't just offering business, she was making a statement about loyalty and values. "Maya, you don't need to pay me to cater your birthday party," Grace protested. "Yes, I do," Maya said firmly. "If you're starting a business, then I want to be your first real customer. And I want to show Papa that you're not the broken woman he thinks you are." The party was intimate, just Maya's closest friends and a few family members. Grace prepared traditional Nigerian dishes alongside modern fusion cuisine, creating a menu that impressed the young guests while honoring cultural traditions. "Mrs. Adebayo," one of Maya's friends said, "this food is absolutely incredible. Do you cater other events?" Grace handed the teenager a business card she had printed that morning. "I'm just getting started, but yes, I do." By evening's end, Grace had 3 more bookings. Word spread quickly through Lagos social networks. Grace's food was exceptional, her presentation flawless, and her prices reasonable compared to expensive catering companies dominating the high-end market. More importantly, Grace brought something most caterers lacked: understanding of how food connected to emotion, celebration, and cultural identity. "You don't just feed people," observed Chief Johnson's wife after Grace catered their anniversary dinner. "You create experiences. Every dish tells a story." Within months, Grace had catered weddings, naming ceremonies, corporate events, and private parties. She hired 2 assistants and was considering commercial kitchen space. But Grace's real education happened outside the catering business. Living on her own budget, managing her own schedule, and building something entirely from her vision taught her lessons she had never learned as Samuel's wife. She learned to negotiate with suppliers, discovering remarkable talent for getting excellent products at fair prices. She learned to market her services, finding she could persuade potential clients through professionalism and warmth. She learned to manage employees, realizing she naturally motivated people to excellence. Most importantly, Grace learned she was far more capable than she had ever imagined. "You've changed," Funmi observed during one of their weekly dinners. "You're different than you were as Samuel's wife." Grace considered her sister's observation. "I think I'm more myself than I've been in decades. Marrying so young, I never discovered who I was as an independent woman. I went from my father's house to Samuel's house without ever living as Grace." "And who is Grace?" Funmi asked with a smile. Grace laughed, realizing the answer came easily. Grace is someone who builds things, who solves problems, who helps people celebrate life's important moments, who doesn't need anyone else's permission to succeed. While Grace built her new life, Samuel's world was collapsing in ways he couldn't yet see. Joy's pregnancy had been difficult, requiring expensive medical care and frequent bed rest. The dynamic, ambitious woman Samuel had married was now often tired, emotional, and demanding. "I can't entertain your clients tonight," Joy would tell Samuel. "The doctor says I need rest." Samuel found himself missing Grace's effortless management of their social obligations. Grace had never used pregnancy as an excuse to avoid hosting duties. Grace had never complained about the demands of being a businessman's wife. More troubling were the financial pressures Joy's lifestyle created. Her spending had increased dramatically since becoming pregnant, justified as nesting expenses for their future child. She hired decorators to redesign the nursery multiple times, bought baby clothes from the most expensive Lagos shops, and insisted on maternity shopping trips to London. "The baby deserves the best," Joy would say when Samuel questioned expenses. "Surely you want your son to have everything he needs." But the real problems were developing in Samuel's business relationships. Without Grace's careful attention to client relationships, Samuel struggled to maintain the personal connections that had driven his success. He forgot important birthdays, missed cultural celebrations that mattered to clients, and failed to maintain the regular contact that kept his firm top of mind for potential business. "Samuel seems distracted lately," Chief Johnson mentioned to his wife after a poorly organized business dinner. "His hospitality used to be legendary, but that felt like an afterthought." Several long-term clients had begun taking business elsewhere, citing concerns about changes in service quality. New business development slowed significantly as Samuel juggled Joy's needs with professional demands. When Joy gave birth to twin boys, Samuel told himself that having sons would make everything worthwhile. These boys would carry on his legacy in ways daughters never could. They would justify every sacrifice he had made, including the loss of Grace. But Joy's brother Emmanuel had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Emmanuel had moved into the family compound, claiming he needed temporary shelter while job hunting. What Samuel didn't realize was that Emmanuel was systematically studying the business operations, learning the filing systems, and gaining access to important documents. Within months, Emmanuel was forging Samuel's signature on contracts, creating fake business deals, and establishing shell companies that appeared legitimate but funneled money away from Samuel's firm. He used Samuel's name to borrow money from some of Lagos's most dangerous moneylenders, men who collected debts through violence rather than legal action. Samuel, focused on his struggling business and Joy's demanding needs, trusted his brother-in-law to handle administrative tasks without proper oversight. He was walking toward a cliff while looking the other way. Soon, Samuel's business was showing serious signs of strain. Revenue was dropping drastically, several key clients had terminated contracts, and Samuel was struggling to maintain the lifestyle Joy expected while supporting two households and paying for the twins' expensive needs. While Samuel's world crumbled, Grace's catering business had evolved into something unexpected, a window into Lagos's most powerful circles. Years after leaving Samuel's house, Grace was catering events for government ministers, bank executives, oil company directors, and multinational corporation leaders. She moved through these gatherings almost invisibly, serving food and managing logistics while observing conversations that shaped Lagos's economic and political landscape. What Grace heard while clearing plates and refilling glasses was fascinating and occasionally shocking. She learned which politicians were taking bribes, which business leaders faced financial difficulties, which marriages were troubled, and which companies planned major changes. Grace realized she had stumbled into the most valuable currency in Lagos: information. During a corporate event in Victoria Island, Grace overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Samuel Adebayo's firm is struggling," one oil company executive said to another. "Their client service has gone downhill since his wife left. Plus, I heard his brother-in-law has been forging contracts." Grace's hand froze as she arranged dessert plates. "What kind of forgeries?" the second executive asked. "Contract modifications, signature fraud, inflated billing." The usual stuff when family members get access to legitimate business operations. I heard he's stolen over 50 million naira so far. Grace felt sick. 50 million naira was enough to destroy Samuel's business completely. It was enough to land him in prison. It was enough to ruin her children's futures. Over the following weeks, Grace used her catering connections to gather more information about Samuel's situation. The picture that emerged was worse than she had initially understood. Emmanuel had been creating fake contracts, forging Samuel's signature on documents, and establishing shell companies that appeared legitimate but diverted money from Samuel's firm. More dangerously, Emmanuel had borrowed money from ruthless moneylenders who didn't accept excuses or delays. Samuel appeared completely unaware of Emmanuel's activities, trusting his brother-in-law while focusing on his struggling business and Joy's demanding needs. Grace realized Samuel was walking toward destruction while blind to the danger. The question was whether she should warn him. Grace struggled with her decision for weeks. Part of her wanted to let Samuel face the consequences of his choices. He had discarded her after decades of loyalty. He had chosen Joy despite clear warning signs. He had humiliated Grace in front of their children and community. But another part of Grace, the part that had once loved Samuel deeply, the part that was mother to his children, couldn't watch him be destroyed by his own blindness. Late one evening, Grace made her decision. She would save Samuel, but not for his sake. Grace's plan required resources she didn't yet have, so she began with what she could control: information and relationships. Over the following months, Grace used her catering business to build strategic relationships with Lagos's financial and legal communities. She catered events for bank executives, law firm partners, and investment company directors. During these events, she asked careful questions about business acquisitions, debt purchasing, and corporate restructuring. Grace learned that distressed businesses could often be acquired for fractions of their actual value, especially when owners were desperate. She learned that debt could be purchased from creditors at significant discounts. She learned that a skilled negotiator with ready cash could often resolve complex financial problems quickly. Most importantly, Grace learned that her reputation for reliability and discretion was becoming valuable in its own right. Business leaders trusted her because she had proven capable of managing complex events flawlessly while maintaining absolute confidentiality about what she observed. When Chief Johnson's bank needed catering for their annual shareholders' meeting, Grace saw her opportunity. "Chief Johnson," Grace said after the event concluded successfully, "I wonder if I could ask your advice about a business matter." Chief Johnson, who had known Grace for decades and respected her intelligence, agreed to meet privately. "I'm interested in expanding beyond catering," Grace explained. "I've been thinking about acquiring distressed companies that could benefit from better management." Chief Johnson looked intrigued. "Do you have specific targets in mind?" Grace smiled carefully. "I'm particularly interested in professional service firms, accounting practices, legal offices, consulting companies, businesses that depend heavily on client relationships and operational excellence. Those can be good investments if you understand the industry." Chief Johnson agreed. "Do you have financing arranged?" Grace had been building toward this moment for months. "I have some capital available, and I'm exploring additional financing options. I was hoping you might advise me about structuring acquisition loans." Over the following hour, Grace outlined a proposal that impressed Chief Johnson with its sophistication. Grace had clearly researched the market thoroughly, understood the financial structures involved, and had realistic projections for business improvement. "Grace, I had no idea you possessed this level of business acumen," Chief Johnson admitted. "Samuel was foolish to let you go." "Perhaps," Grace replied diplomatically, "but his mistake might be my opportunity." Chief Johnson agreed to introduce Grace to his bank's commercial lending team and serve as a reference for her character and business judgment. Within weeks, Grace had secured a business acquisition loan that would allow her to purchase companies worth substantial amounts. Now she was ready for the next phase. Grace spent months meticulously researching Samuel's financial situation. She learned exactly how much he owed, to whom, and under what terms. She identified which creditors were most dangerous, which debts were most urgent, and which legal problems posed the greatest threats. Working through intermediaries, Grace began quietly purchasing Samuel's debts from his various creditors. She offered immediate cash payments at significant discounts, which most creditors preferred to lengthy legal battles with uncertain outcomes. The debt purchases were structured through a holding company Grace had established, so Samuel had no idea who was acquiring his obligations. From his perspective, his debts were simply being transferred from one financial institution to another. Within weeks, Grace owned the vast majority of Samuel's debt, nearly all of his total obligations. Grace also gathered evidence about Emmanuel's theft that could clear Samuel of criminal liability, while ensuring Emmanuel faced justice for his crimes. Finally, Grace prepared a business acquisition proposal for Samuel's accounting firm that would resolve his debt crisis while positioning her as the company's new owner. On a rainy evening, exactly 3 years after Samuel had thrown her out of their home, Grace was ready to make her move. She arranged to meet Samuel at a quiet restaurant in Ikeja, far from Victoria Island circles where they might be recognized. Samuel arrived looking haggard and desperate. The confident, arrogant man who had dismissed Grace as outdated was gone. In his place sat someone who looked older, thinner, and deeply frightened. "Grace," Samuel said, his voice shaking, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I have no right to ask for your help, but I don't know where else to turn." Grace studied her former husband calmly. "What exactly do you want from me, Samuel?" "I'm drowning," Samuel admitted. "Joy's brother destroyed my business, and I owe money to people who don't accept excuses. I heard you've become successful with your catering. I hoped. You hoped I would save you," Grace finished. "The way I saved you decades ago when you had nothing. The way I saved you every day of our marriage by building your empire while you took credit." Samuel nodded miserably. "I was a fool, Grace. I threw away the best thing in my life for a woman who never loved me. I destroyed our family for someone who was only interested in money and status." Grace leaned back, observing Samuel's desperation with detached interest. "And now you want me to fix it? Again?" "I'll do anything," Samuel whispered. "I'll sign over whatever's left of the business to you. I'll publicly acknowledge what you did for our family. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you and the children." Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching Samuel squirm. "I've already fixed it, Samuel." Samuel looked confused. "What do you mean?" Grace opened her briefcase and placed a stack of documents on the table. "I own your debts now, all of them. Every obligation that would have destroyed you, I've purchased them over the past months." Samuel's eyes widened in shock. "You... what? How?" "I also have evidence that will clear you of criminal charges related to Emmanuel's forgeries. Joy's divorce will be much less expensive than she expects, thanks to documentation of her infidelity and her brother's crimes." Samuel stared at the documents, then at Grace, struggling to process what he was hearing. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you help me after what I did to you?" Grace's smile was sharp as a razor blade. "I didn't help you, Samuel. I acquired you." Grace placed another document on the table, a comprehensive business acquisition contract that would make Samuel a minority partner in his own former company, now restructured under Grace's ownership. "You have 2 choices," Grace said calmly. "Accept this partnership, work under my leadership, and slowly earn back a position of respect, or refuse, face your creditors alone, and likely end up in prison or worse." Samuel's hands trembled as he read the contract. It was generous enough to provide a living wage and a chance to rebuild his reputation, but it made absolutely clear that Grace was now the senior partner in every sense. "There are conditions," Grace continued. "You will publicly acknowledge my role in building our original business. You will ensure our children understand the truth about our marriage and my contributions. You will support my business decisions without question, and you will never ever make the mistake of underestimating me again." Samuel looked up at her with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and grudging admiration. "You've become someone I don't recognize, Grace." "I've become who I always was," Grace replied. "You just never bothered to notice." Samuel signed the contract with shaking hands, officially transferring control of his life's work to the woman he had discarded years earlier. As they left the restaurant, Samuel walked beside Grace like a subordinate accompanying his supervisor. The power dynamic that had defined their marriage for decades had been completely reversed. "What happens now?" Samuel asked as they reached their cars. "Now you go home and tell Joy that the financial crisis is resolved, but that your circumstances have changed significantly," Grace replied. "You might also want to explain that her brother will be arrested within the week, and that her divorce settlement will be much smaller than she anticipated. Samuel nodded numbly, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "And Samuel," Grace added as she opened her car door, "tomorrow morning you'll report to my office. We have a business to rebuild, and you have a lot to learn about working for someone else." Joy's world collapsed faster than Samuel's had been rebuilt. When police arrested Emmanuel for fraud and forgery, Joy lost her primary source of emotional support and financial advice. When Samuel explained that his debt crisis had been resolved through a business partnership with Grace, Joy realized her plans for accessing Samuel's assets had been permanently derailed. The final blow came when Joy discovered that Grace had documented evidence of her affair with Chief Emeka, Samuel's former business rival. "You've been cheating on me." Samuel confronted Joy one evening, holding photographs and hotel receipts that Grace had provided through her lawyer. Joy's response was exactly what Grace had predicted: defiant, manipulative, and ultimately self-destructive. "So what if I was?" Joy snapped. "You treated me like a trophy wife while giving all your real respect to your precious Grace. At least Chief Emeka appreciated what I offered him." Samuel stared at his second wife in amazement. "I gave you everything, Joy. I destroyed my first marriage for you. I provided luxury, status, everything you said you wanted. You gave me the leftovers of a life you built with another woman." Joy replied coldly, "I was never your real partner. I was just your younger, prettier accessory." The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. Joy was accusing him of exactly what he had done to Grace, treating her as an ornament rather than a genuine partner. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. With evidence of Joy's infidelity and her brother's crimes, Samuel negotiated a minimal settlement. Joy left the Victoria Island mansion with little more than her personal belongings and the twin boys. Samuel learned later that Joy had moved to Abuja, reportedly seeking another wealthy husband to support her lifestyle. She was never going to be satisfied, Samuel confided to Grace during one of their weekly business meetings. She wanted the benefits of marriage without any responsibilities. Grace listened without comment. She had no interest in Samuel's emotional processing of his failed second marriage. Her focus was entirely on rebuilding the business and securing her family's future. The most important conversation of Grace's transformation came when she gathered Maya, David, and Michael in her new office to explain what had happened to their father's business. Maya, now in university studying law, was first to understand the implications. "Mama, you own Papa's company now?" she asked, amazement in her voice. "I own the debts that would have destroyed your father," Grace corrected gently. "I've restructured them into a business partnership that allows him to keep working while ensuring the company's survival." David, studying business administration, was fascinated by the strategic aspects. "How did you accumulate enough capital to purchase that much debt?" Grace smiled at her son's analytical mind. "I learned that information is more valuable than money. I used my catering business to build relationships with people who could provide financing. I leveraged my reputation for reliability into business opportunities, and I was patient enough to wait for the right moment to act." Michael, now finishing secondary school and most emotionally affected by the family's upheaval, had a different concern. "Does this mean Papa will be okay? That our family can be together again?" Grace's heart ached for her youngest son's hope. "Your father will be okay financially," she said carefully, "but our family situation is complicated. Papa is divorcing Joy, and I've built a different life now." "But you saved him," Maya observed. "After everything he did to you, you saved him." Grace considered how to explain her motivations. "I didn't save your father for his sake," she said finally. "I saved him for yours. His destruction would have hurt you in ways you didn't deserve. His failure would have damaged your futures, your education, your opportunities. But also," Grace continued, "I learned something important about power during these past years. Revenge is temporary. It feels good for a moment, but then it's over. Real power comes from being so successful, so indispensable, so respected that the people who hurt you can never afford to ignore you again." David leaned forward, intrigued. "So this wasn't about getting back at Papa. This was about ensuring that your father, and anyone else who might consider underestimating me, understands exactly what they're dealing with," Grace replied. "I'm not the same woman who was thrown out of that house years ago. I'm someone who builds businesses, solves problems, and controls outcomes. That's much more powerful than being someone who seeks revenge. Maya smiled with pride. Mama, you've become the most successful businesswoman I know. I've become the woman I always had the potential to be, Grace corrected. I just needed to discover her for myself. As the conversation wound down, Maya lingered behind. Mama, I want to work for you, she said. When I graduate law school, I want to join your company as legal counsel. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Are you sure? You could work anywhere, Maya. You don't need to limit yourself to my business. Maya smiled, determination shining in her eyes. Mama, in these years you've built a catering company into a business empire. You've gone from being discarded to being indispensable. I don't want to work anywhere else. I want to learn from the strongest woman I know. Years after Grace's acquisition of Samuel's business, Adebayo Enterprises had become one of Lagos's most respected professional service firms. Under Grace's leadership, the company had expanded beyond accounting to include business consulting, legal services, and investment advisory. Maya had joined as chief legal counsel after graduating at the top of her law school class. David was completing an MBA while working part-time in business development. Michael was finishing secondary school with plans to study engineering before joining the family business. Samuel worked as a senior partner, managing client relationships and technical projects under Grace's strategic direction. He was competent, reliable, and no longer made major decisions without Grace's approval. It's strange, Samuel admitted to Grace one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports. I'm working harder now than when I owned the company, but I'm less stressed. Grace looked up from the financial statements she was reviewing. That's because you're no longer carrying the weight of ownership. You can focus on what you do best, technical work and client service, while someone else handles strategy, risk management, and long-term planning. You mean while you handle those things, Samuel corrected. Yes, Grace agreed simply, I handle those things. Their working relationship had evolved into something that surprised both of them. Samuel had initially resented taking direction from Grace, but he gradually came to respect her business judgment and strategic vision. Grace had initially viewed Samuel as a necessary but problematic employee, but she came to appreciate his technical expertise and client management skills. They weren't friends, and they certainly weren't romantic partners, but they had become effective business colleagues who understood each other's strengths and compensated for each other's weaknesses. Grace, Samuel said quietly, I know I can never undo what I did to you, but I want you to know that I understand now what I lost when I threw you away. Grace studied her former husband's face, seeing genuine remorse alongside the humility that had replaced his former arrogance. Samuel, the woman you threw away doesn't exist anymore, Grace replied. She was someone who defined herself through other people's needs and achievements. The woman sitting across from you now defines herself through her own capabilities and choices. And that woman is remarkable, Samuel said sincerely. Yes, she is. Grace's transformation from discarded wife to business empire builder caught the attention of Lagos's media and business community. Years after Samuel had thrown her out of their home, Grace was featured on the cover of African Business Weekly as Nigeria's most inspiring female entrepreneur. The magazine article detailed her journey from homeless wife to successful business owner, her strategic acquisition of her former husband's company, and her innovative approaches to professional service delivery. Mrs. Adebayo represents a new generation of African businesswomen, the article concluded. She demonstrates that setbacks can become launching pads, that betrayal can fuel transformation, and that the most powerful form of success is the kind that makes you indispensable to the very people who once considered you disposable. The interview took place in Grace's office on the top floor of the Adebayo building, a modern high-rise she'd constructed in the heart of Lagos Island. Samuel worked several floors below, managing day-to-day operations under Grace's strategic direction. Mrs. Adebayo, the journalist asked, do you consider yourself a success story about women's empowerment? Grace considered the question carefully. I consider myself a story about human potential, she said. For decades, I was defined by my relationship to someone else. I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's helper. It took losing everything to discover who I really was. What advice would you give to women facing similar situations? Remember that your current situation is not your final destination, Grace replied. Every ending is also a beginning. The woman they try to throw away might be the woman you were always meant to become. Do you have plans for further expansion? Grace smiled. I'm launching a foundation to support women transitioning from dependency to entrepreneurship. Too many women never discover their own capabilities because they're too busy supporting other people's dreams. I want to change that. After the interview, Grace stood at her office window, looking out over Lagos. The city sprawled before her like a kingdom she had conquered through intelligence, determination, and strategic patience. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maya. Mama, Papa asked me to tell you that he's proud of what you've built. He says he finally understands what he lost. Grace smiled and typed back, tell him that understanding is the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom, unlike youth or beauty, only grows more valuable with time. Years later, Grace stood in the boardroom of the Grace Adebayo Center for Women's Entrepreneurship, watching as another group of women graduated from her business development program. These women had arrived broken, discarded, abandoned by husbands, families, or circumstances. They were leaving as entrepreneurs, business owners, and leaders. Every woman has the potential to create, to build, to lead, Grace told the graduating class, but too many women never discover that potential because they're taught to define themselves through other people's achievements. Today, you're claiming your own power. The center had become Grace's greatest achievement, a comprehensive program that provided not just business training, but psychological support, legal assistance, and financial backing for women starting their own enterprises. Maya, now a successful lawyer specializing in women's rights, served as the center's legal director. David managed the business development programs after completing his MBA. Michael, now an engineer, had designed the center's technology infrastructure while working on his own consulting firm. Samuel attended the graduation ceremony, sitting quietly in the back row. He had become a different man over the years, humbler, wiser, more appreciative of what he had nearly lost. He worked contentedly under Grace's leadership, managing technical operations while Grace focused on strategic vision. After the ceremony, Samuel approached Grace as she reviewed notes for her next foundation board meeting. Grace, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you. Not just for saving my business, but for showing me what real strength looks like. Grace looked up at her former husband, seeing the man he had become rather than the man who had betrayed her. We both learned important lessons, Samuel, Grace replied. You learned that success built on someone else's sacrifice isn't sustainable. I learned that my value doesn't depend on other people's recognition. Do you ever regret it? Samuel asked. The years we lost, the pain we caused each other. Grace considered the question as she watched the latest group of women entrepreneurs celebrating their new beginnings. I regret the pain, Grace said finally, but I can't regret a journey that led to this moment, that led to these women discovering their power. That led to our children understanding what resilience really means. Samuel nodded, understanding that Grace had found something more valuable than the marriage they had lost. She had found herself. As Grace prepared to leave for her next meeting, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. The pain of betrayal had been real and deep. The fear of starting over had been overwhelming. The challenge of rebuilding her identity from scratch had been exhausting. But the woman who had emerged from that crucible was someone Grace genuinely admired. Someone who built things, solved problems, helped others, and demanded respect through competence rather than begging for it through compliance. Mama Grace, Michael said, appearing in the doorway of her office, the new class is ready for orientation. Are you coming? Grace smiled at her youngest son, now a confident young man who had learned that families could be broken and rebuilt, that people could be hurt and heal, that strength could emerge from the most devastating circumstances. Yes, Grace said, gathering her materials. Let's go help some more women discover who they really are. As she walked toward the classroom filled with women ready to transform their lives, Grace realized that her revenge was complete. Not because she had destroyed her enemies, but because she had become someone they could never touch again. The first wife's reckoning wasn't about punishment, it was about power. And Grace had learned that the greatest power of all was the ability to write your own story, regardless of who tried to tear out the pages. Never underestimate a woman who has been pushed to her limits. True strength isn't about avoiding hardship, it's about transforming hardship into wisdom. pain into power, and betrayal into the fuel for becoming unstoppable. Grace's journey reminds us that dignity, intelligence, and patience are more powerful than revenge. Sometimes the best response to those who try to diminish you is simply to become so successful that they can never again afford to ignore you. In the end, the first wife didn't need revenge. Her transformation was justice enough. And sometimes that's the most powerful victory of all. What did this story teach you about resilience and transformation? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who might need this message of hope and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the unbreakable spirit of people who refuse to be defined by other people's limitations. Your current situation is not your final destination. Sometimes the person they try to throw away is exactly the person you are always meant to become.